Thank you for tuning into the reading, produced by Black Spectrum Network. Click the subscribe button and the bell button to get the latest updates on this channel. You can purchase a private psychic reading by going to www.blackspectrumnetwork.com. If you want spiritual guidance to learn how to work with your ancestors, or you're interested in deepening your spiritual experiences, subscribe to our Patreon. You can get these and other videos at least 1 week ahead of their YouTube release date. That's patreon.com/Black Spectrum Network. I'm going to shuffle my personality cards about the civil rights activist Frederick Douglass. Okay, so the first card that I get for Frederick Douglass is the card for the networker, and this is speaking about him being a networker between the African American community and the white political, or the white elite communities. It speaks about him being able to share information about the secrets from the white community to the African American community, and also him sharing the needs and concerns of the African American community to the white elites that could pretty much control the resources, opportunities, and rewards that the African Americans could receive from the U.S. government. It was also speaking about him being socially aware and socially empathetic towards the plight of African Americans, and him also not wanting to gain anything from conveying the information that he conveying this information to the white elites. He didn't want to gain anything personally. He only wanted to spread the message and for white people to make the living conditions for African Americans better. I get the card for the beggar, which is speaking about him speaking about Frederick Douglass being someone that always thought about his lifetime as a slave and not wanting to go back to that sort of lifestyle. He felt that living as a slave meant that he had to depend on his slave master for his own physical survival, and he also felt emasculated by that. It speaks about him being someone that is very humble, very compassionate, someone that has a high self-esteem, even though he experienced life as a slave. He was someone that hated to ask for things, and his life was spent asking for things, and so he had to face those internal fears of asking and then being rejected, asking and then having to fight for it, asking and having people to lie to you saying that they're going to give it and they're not. And it was kind of like he still felt like he was in chains because he was still asking the white man to to ameliorate the conditions of the African American community and to stop fucking with them. So I get the card for the athlete, which is speaking about Frederick Douglass being able to transcend different physical limits. And he was not someone that was handicapped by his physicality. He didn't work out a lot. Okay. He was not someone that was particularly athletic. It just means that he had health conditions that he would have to work through. He was someone that was always tired, didn't get a lot of sleep, and he would use his own personal willpower his willpower was what helped him to be as successful as he was. He's someone that he was someone that was particularly unselfish, and he felt that he had an anointing to lead the African American community, but he didn't feel like he was entitled to leading the African American community. He felt that he felt that for all intents and purposes that he was invulnerable to white people's is racism. And he felt that he felt that once he had acquired his freedom, that he was, pretty much entitled to gaining respect from white people, no matter how they felt about him. So even though he felt like his skin color was, even though he knew that his skin color would create obstacles for him in his lifetime, he never thought he would be blocked from overcoming those obstacles. He felt that his skin color actually gave him a sort of magical je ne sais quoi that would enable him to overcome life's obstacles. That's pretty much what I'm saying. Okay, so the child divine card is speaking about him. He was someone that always looked at situations, no matter what they were, from a place of optimism. He tried to not hold any prejudices against white people, even though they were prejudiced towards him. He was very he was a very godly man. Prayed a lot and definitely believed in God. But he also felt, he also felt that it was God that was ordering his footsteps, and God that was protecting him from being lynched. And in addition to that, he felt like Jesus Christ, he had a very good relationship with Jesus Christ. He was someone that was that was devout in his spirituality, not someone that attended church all the time, but someone that was devout in spirituality and in his belief in God as a Christian man. I get the card for the priest, which is speaking about him knowing what his spiritual commitments to society were, which were to advance race relations between whites and African Americans, and to also advance the consciousness of white people, because they couldn't see the humanity. They couldn't fully see the humanity of the African American life. And he had to channel the spiritual energy and to project it onto white people so that they could be more like him. And he, again, as I said before, he had no prejudices towards African Americans. He had no prejudices towards white people. And he felt that white people could be more like him and be less prejudiced and not seduced by the law, not seduced by mainstream culture. And he had to just trust he had to have a supreme trust in his spiritual vision, because that's what allowed him to springboard himself from slavery and thrust himself into the white community and completely transform the white community inside and out. I get the card for the prince, and this is speaking about Frederick Douglass being someone that was very romantic, very charming. He had a lot of sex appeal, and it was because of it was because of his intellect. That's what gave him his allure. He used his romantic charm to acquire his power as well. So, in the future, we may look at, Frederick Douglass's astrology. I wouldn't be surprised if he has Cancer in his chart, but I see him being someone that's very, very likable, and someone that always had, a trump card up his sleeve, and he knew who to network with. He knew who to flirt with. He knew who to work with very closely. And all those things being said, a lot of the opportunities that were given to him were because he charmed the person, male or female, into wanting to work with him and helping to advance his cause. The final card that I get is the card for the teacher, which is speaking about him communicating his knowledge, skills, experience, and wisdom through his lectures, through his speeches, and also in his books. He was someone that was trying to teach positivity, and also he was trying to teach, he was trying to constructively teach white people about their prejudices, and he was trying to also teach African Americans about their glory, majesty, and destiny as a chosen people. And he was also someone that tried to He was also someone that tried to sharpen his skills, knowledge, and wisdom by acquiring as much education as he could. He was someone that studied, someone that always listened to. He firmly believed that a broken clock can be right twice a day. So he tried to hear wisdom from the peasants. He tried to hear wisdom from the people whose minds were still enslaved, both white and black. And he tried to, also acquire wisdom from the people that were powerful enough to change the political and social circumstances of the United States. Okay. So now I'm going to ask a few questions about Frederick Douglass. We want to know who is Frederick Douglass's mother? Was his father his slave owner? What are his thoughts about literacy and knowing multiple languages for survival? And what were the unforeseen consequences of teaching slaves how to read? Okay, Frederick Douglass did not know who his mother was. His mother was a slave from another plantation. His slave own his owner was his father, yes, but his mother was a slave from another plantation, and that baby from the other plantation, which was Frederick Douglass, was sold to that particular slave owner. The identity of the mother, I don't even think the slave owner knew who that woman was. It just wasn't that important. It took Frederick Douglass a long time to adjust to not knowing who his mother was. I see that was something that stayed on his mind, hurt his feelings, and broke his heart. And he was constantly planning to approach his father and at least try to figure out, what did his mother look like? Does he remember does his father remember the encounter with her? What plantation did she live on? But he wasn't strong enough to ask those questions, and he found himself always trying to, readjust his expectations to meeting. He tried to readjust his expectations, which was, I may not ever know this, but I still want to find it out. So it's something that Frederick Douglass questioned, and he was curious about all his lifetime. But the identity of his mother, he never knew. But what I can say is that she was a woman who was on another plantation. Okay, so now we want to know was his father his owner? Okay, so we get the card for victory. So his father was his owner. His father didn't really want to recognize that. His father. Okay, his father would say that he's his father under the circumstances that he did help to raise Frederick Douglass in some way, but he didn't want to acknowledge that his father was biologically his father. Now, with Frederick Douglass's thoughts on literacy and knowing multiple languages, he felt that it was important for people to say what's on their mind, and that if you're not literate, you can't say everything that's on your mind. Also, if you're not literate, you can't understand what's on everyone else's mind either. And then I have the Prince of Cups here, which is him saying that, you do have your intuition, but you must be able to communicate your intuitive feelings and thoughts eloquently. But with the Princess of Swords here, it's speaking specifically about, him feeling that African Americans needed to become literate so that they could use their words and communicate to white people with their in communicate to white people in writing what their issues were with the American justice system, especially as far as race relations were concerned. That being said, Frederick Douglass felt that literacy was important because he didn't want to be the only person, going back and forth. But he didn't want to be the main liaison between the white community and the black community. He didn't want to be, the, token black guy or the African American, the representative for the African American community. That he felt that he had an anointing, but he didn't feel that he was entitled to be the representative of the African American community. And he also felt that the community was highly intelligent, but they weren't given the resources to survive. And part of having, having one of the main resources of survival is literacy. The bonus card here is saying that he was disappointed. He was disappointed to know that some African Americans did not care to become literate. Some did not care to learn how to read. He was someone that felt that African Americans, because of slavery, they didn't know what to value or what to appreciate, because once they acquired their freedom, they had so, how do I say this? Once African Americans had acquired their freedom, he felt that what they wanted was not always what they needed, and what they needed they couldn't always get, because they either couldn't read what it was that white people were planning for them or saying about them, or they couldn't, write and properly engage with white people in a way that, the law would respect it. Now, all things being considered, Frederick Douglass's disappointment rested upon the American political and social system, which was disenfranchising African Americans. So even though he was disappointed with the African Americans that did not want to read, he still kept those feelings to himself and didn't voice them out loud. He just felt like it was important for them to have to be literate and to be able to communicate themselves in ways that white people could understand them. Okay. Now now I'm gonna ask about, what were the unforeseen consequences of teaching slaves how to read? The consequences are on two levels. On one level, it made them much more profitable people. So teaching them how to read enabled them to teaching slaves how to read enabled them to liberate themselves. They felt like they were gaining a lot of knowledge. They felt that they could entertain themselves. They could find ways to communicate in private as well. But at the same time, it was also something they had to keep hidden, because I get the card for failure and the card for ruin. So the ones that could read may not have been the best teachers, and they also may not have found students that were willing to take the risk to learn how to read, because it took such a long time. So with the card for ruin here, it's speaking specifically about this. It's too much of a burden. it was too much of a burden for slaves to learn how to read. And the burden was that they'd have an added target on their back because white people would see them as a threat. And they were a threat because white people would, they use the English language as a code to, speak about African Americans without them understanding it. And if African Americans could decipher the code, then that was a threat to white supremacy at the time. So the unforeseen circumstances of teaching slaves how to read are that it placed a heavier target on the backs of the enslaved people. I mean, it placed a bigger target on the backs of enslaved people, and it also made it really difficult for them to accept that they were enslaved once they learned how to read, because then they saw that they were actually very intelligent and perhaps in some ways more intelligent than their slave owners and the prejudiced white people that were trying to oppress them. Okay, so now I'm going to ask, how did Frederick Douglass deal with the financial and critical success of his book? What did he get from his meetings with Abraham Lincoln, and what did he know about Abraham Lincoln's death? Okay, as far as how Frederick Douglass felt about the financial success of his book, and the critical success of his book, he loved it. He loved it. It was that book that enabled him to meet his wife, and to really bond with her. It was, and I also see that the financial and critical success of his book led to him encountering many, many women that he was able to explore. He was able to have sex with, because I'm seeing Frederick Douglass, celebrating, feeling like his wishes are for, he's like, hey, I've gotten what I finally gotten what I wanted. I've gotten an audience. I've gotten a platform. I did it. And I'm the talk of the town. So many people are really listening to me. And here it is that these women are paying attention to me, especially white women. And Frederick Douglass did have a deep affection for white women. The Queen of Discs here is his wife, and his wife felt that is the second wife. So the second wife felt that because of the financial success of the book, that she's like, hey, I'm securing the bag too. I'm helping him I'm helping him to continue his legacy. I'm really contributing to this man's greatness. He's so, he's so resilient, and I'm proud to see that he is, he's.
So fuel my fire, take me higher, I'll be your